The stars had always called to humanity, and in the year 2247, they finally answered that call when the first human ship broke through the light-speed barrier and entered a galaxy that was already full of life. The Galactic Concord was an alliance of 12 ancient species who had ruled the stars for over 50,000 years. And when they detected the small human vessel emerging from faster-than-light travel, they watched with mild curiosity and even milder concern. Humans were young, they said to each other in their council chambers. So terribly young and so terribly small. Ambassador Elena Vasquez was chosen to represent Earth in these first crucial years of contact, and she approached the task with a patience that would become legendary among the stars. She was a small woman with dark hair streaked with silver and eyes that had seen too much of Earth's troubled history. And when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of a species that had learned its lessons through fire and blood and tears. The elder races found her puzzling from the very first meeting, where other young species came to the Concord, begging for weapons and military alliances. Humanity asked for nothing of the sort. Instead, Ambassador Vasquez requested permission to share medical technology with struggling colonies, offered agricultural innovations to worlds suffering from famine, and proposed cultural exchange programs that would let species learn from one another. The Vethkai, an ancient race of crystalline beings who had conquered half the galaxy in their youth, regarded her with something between confusion and contempt. "You have no warships," the Vethkai delegate observed during one council session, his voice resonating through the translation matrix like wind through broken glass. "You have no planetary defense grid, no orbital weapons platforms, no dreadnoughts or carriers or destroyers." Ambassador Vasquez smiled, and those who knew her well might have noticed that the smile did not quite reach her eyes. "We have hospitals," she replied. "We have schools and farms and libraries. And we have hoped that the galaxy might be better than the history we left behind." The council laughed, not cruelly, but with the tired amusement of adults watching a child declare that they would never grow old. "You will learn," the Vexari representative said, his massive insectoid form shifting in his specially designed chair. "The galaxy is not kind to those who cannot defend themselves." The Vexari were warriors, had always been warriors, and their empire stretched across 300 star systems built on the bones of species who had been too weak to resist them. They looked at humanity and saw prey for the first 5 years. Nothing happened to challenge humanity's gentle approach to the stars. They built colonies on distant worlds, established trade routes, and earned a reputation as reliable partners who always kept their word and never asked for more than fair exchange. Other species began to seek them out, not for protection, but for friendship, and humanity welcomed them all with open arms. Then the Vexari came to Kepler 442b. The colony there was called New Helsinki, home to 12,000 humans who had left Earth, seeking a fresh start among the stars. They were farmers and teachers and engineers, families with children who had never known war, who had grown up believing that the dark chapters of human history were closed forever. The Vexari fleet arrived without warning, on a quiet spring morning when the twin suns were just rising over the eastern mountains. There was no declaration of war, no demand for surrender, no explanation of any kind. The ships simply opened fire. The orbital bombardment lasted for 6 hours, and when it was over, New Helsinki was nothing but ash and melted stone, and the scattered remains of 12,000 dreams. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for humanity's response. Surely now the young species would show their true colors, would reveal the warships they must have been hiding, would strike back with all the fury that any rational being would feel after such an unprovoked atrocity. Instead, Ambassador Vasquez appeared before the Galactic Concord with tears on her cheeks and a formal protest in her hands. "We demand justice. she said, her voice steady despite the grief that threatened to break her. "We demand that the Concord condemn this act of senseless violence and hold the Dexari accountable for the murder of innocent civilians." The Dexari delegate made a sound that might have been laughter. "They were on our territory," he said. Though everyone in the chamber knew that Kepler 442b had been unclaimed space. "We were simply removing an infestation." Ambassador Vasquez stared at him for a long moment. And something flickered in her eyes, something old and dark and terrible. But it was gone so quickly that no one was quite sure they had seen it at all. "We will not respond with violence," she said finally. "We will not become what we once were, not even for this. But we asked the Concord to remember what happened here today. The Council voted to take no action. And humanity accepted the decision with quiet dignity. They sent ships to collect the dead, built a memorial on the scorched earth of New Helsinki, and continued their work among the stars as if nothing had changed. The Dexari High Command gathered in their war room to analyze the human response. And what they found made them hungry for more. "They are weak," General Crickstell declared, his mandibles clicking with excitement. "Weaker than any species we have ever encountered. And their worlds are rich with resources we could use. They have allies," another general cautioned. "Other species who might object if we push too far." Crickstell dismissed the concern with a wave of his armored limb. "Their allies are soft creatures who befriended humans precisely because humans are no threat to anyone," he said. "None of them will risk war with the Empire over a species that will not even fight for itself." He pulled up a star map showing the locations of every human colony in the galaxy, and his compound eyes gleamed with predatory anticipation. "Mark these 3 worlds for the next cleansing," he ordered. "Let us see how long the humans can maintain their precious principles when their children are dying, far away on Earth, in a room that officially did not exist." A group of very old and very tired men and women gathered around a table covered with files that had not been opened in 200 years. They did not speak of war or revenge or hatred. They spoke of mathematics, of logistics, of the cold equations that governed the movement of fleets and the destruction of worlds. And in the silence between their words, something ancient began to stir. Something that humanity had buried deep and tried so very hard to forget. The wolves were not yet awake, but they were beginning to dream. The attacks came like clockwork after New Helsinki, one every few weeks. Each one more brutal than the last. Of Dexari had learned that humanity would not fight back. And this knowledge made them bold in ways that even their allies in the Concord found disturbing. On the colony world of Proxima Verde, they did not simply bomb from orbit, but landed ground troops to hunt the fleeing civilians through the forests, turning murder into sport on the mining station called Armstrong's Hope. They disabled the life support systems and watched through sensors as 3,000 humans slowly suffocated in the cold dark of space, and when a hospital ship called the Mercy of Geneva tried to evacuate wounded refugees from an attacked settlement, the Dexari intercepted it and tore it apart piece by piece while broadcasting the screams of the dying across every frequency in the sector. The ship had been carrying 400 children. Ambassador Vasquez stood before the Galactic Concord again and again, her voice growing hoarse from pleading. Her eyes red from tears she no longer bothered to hide. "How many more must die before you act?" she demanded. And the council shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but offered nothing but empty words of sympathy. The Dexari delegate attended every session, watching her with the patient amusement of a predator playing with its food. "Your species chose weakness," he told her during one particularly heated exchange. "You cannot now complain when the strong treat you as nature intended. There is nothing natural about murdering children," Vasquez replied, her hands trembling with barely contained fury. "On the contrary," the Dexari said, It is the most natural thing in the universe. And you would know this if your species were not so determined to deny your own instincts. Back on Earth, the public mood was shifting in dangerous ways for 2 centuries. Humanity had defined itself by its rejection of violence, by its determination to never repeat the horrors of the last World War that had nearly driven them to extinction. But there were limits to how much grief any species could bear. And those limits were being tested with every new report of slaughter protests erupted in cities around the globe. Not calls for peace, but demands for action, for justice, for revenge. Remember New Helsinki became a rallying cry, painted on walls and shouted in streets. And the government found itself facing a choice it had hoped never to make. The United Earth Council convened an emergency session in Geneva. In the same hall where the peace accords had been signed 200 years before, the chamber was designed to inspire hope, with soaring windows that let in the golden light of sunset and walls covered with murals depicting humanity's journey from war to peace. But there was no hope in the eyes of the 11 council members who took their seats that evening. Only exhaustion and sorrow and a terrible growing. Resolved Chancellor Maria Santos called the session to order with a voice that shook despite her best efforts to control it. We have received word that the Dexari are planning simultaneous attacks on 3 more colonies, she announced. Intelligence suggests they intend to kill everyone, military age or not, as a demonstration that humanity cannot protect its own people. Then we must evacuate those worlds immediately, Councillor Chen suggested. Pull everyone back to the core systems where we can what? Where we can what? Councillor Okonkwo interrupted, her voice sharp with frustration. Hide, cower? Let them take everything we have built while we retreat further and further until there is nowhere left to go. The chamber fell silent, and in that silence, Chancellor Santos made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Bring the Black Archives, she said quietly, and several councillors went pale at the words. The Black Archives were humanity's darkest secret, a collection of weapons research and military doctrine that had been sealed after the last World War and forbidden by unanimous global treaty. Every schoolchild on Earth learned about them in the most general terms, taught that humanity had once created terrible things in its madness, but had chosen to lock those things away forever. What the school children did not learn was that the archives had been maintained all along, updated in secret by a small group of specialists who understood that the universe might not always allow humanity the luxury of peace fleet. Admiral Yuki Tanaka was one of those specialists, and she entered the council chamber carrying a secure case that seemed far too small for the weight it represented. She was a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen things she preferred not to remember. And when she set the case on the table and opened it, even the councillors who had voted for this moment felt a chill run down their spines. Project Prometheus, she said, a voice flat and professional. Antimatter weapons capable of destroying planets. Developed during the resource wars of 2089 and refined 3 times since. She pulled up holographic displays that filled the chamber with blueprints and equations and footage of test detonations that turned moons into expanding clouds of plasma. Project Nemesis, she continued. Self-replicating attack drones designed to infiltrate enemy infrastructure and dismantle it from within. Never deployed but maintained in storage facilities across the solar system. Project Fenrir. And here her voice wavered slightly. Biological weapons engineered to target specific genetic profiles, capable of exterminating entire species within a single generation. The list went on, each project more terrible than the last, and when Tanaka finished, the council sat in horrified silence. We built these things to kill each other, Councillor Park finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. What kind of monsters were we? The humankind, Tanaka replied without judgment. We are capable of great love and great cruelty. And we have spent 200 years pretending the cruelty no longer exists, but it does. And now we must decide whether to use it. Chancellor Santos looked around the table at her fellow counselors, at the fear in their eyes and the grief and the terrible burden of the choice before them. We will not strike first, she said finally. We will not become what we were, but we will give them one final chance to stop this madness. And if they refuse, she did not finish the sentence. But she did not need to. Everyone in the chamber knew what would happen if the Dexara refused. Prepare the warning, Santos ordered, and pray to whatever gods still listen that they are wise enough to heed it. Admiral Tanaka nodded and began transmitting orders to facilities that did not officially exist, to ships that were not on any registry, to soldiers who had been waiting in the shadows for a call they had hoped would never come. The wolves were waking up, and soon the galaxy would learn why humanity had tried so hard to keep them asleep. The broadcast began at exactly midnight Universal Standard Time. Transmitted simultaneously from every human communication array in the galaxy, it reached Dex Ari space within hours, bounced through Concord relay stations to every corner of known civilization, and was picked up by species who had never even heard of humanity until that moment. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat alone in a small recording studio on Earth, surrounded by screens showing the faces of billions of humans watching from colonies and stations and ships scattered across the stars. She had not slept in 3 days, and the weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her shoulders like the gravity of a dying sun. But her voice, when she spoke, was steady and clear, carrying across the void with a calm that was somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. To the Dex Ari Empire, and to all who watch and do nothing, she began. I speak to you now not as a diplomat but as a human being, as a mother and a daughter and a sister to every soul your weapons have silenced. She paused, and in that pause, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. For 19 months, you have hunted our people like animals, burned our homes, murdered our children, and laughed at our grief. You have watched us bury our dead and mistaken our tears for weakness. You have seen us turn the other cheek and believed that we had no fist to raise. You were wrong. The screens behind her flickered, and suddenly they were filled with images that had not been shown publicly in 200 years. Footage from the last World War. Cities reduced to radioactive ash. Armies clashing with weapons that could crack continents. Mushroom clouds rising over what had once been the greatest civilizations Earth had ever known. This is what we are, Vasquez said, her voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. This is what we did to ourselves when we forgot how to be human. And when the fires finally burned out, we swore that we would never become these monsters again. We locked away our weapons. We buried our battleships. We erased the knowledge of destruction from our schools and taught our children that peace was the only path worth walking. And for 200 years, we kept that promise. The images faded, replaced by Vasquez's face. And those who watched saw something in her eyes that made even the bravest warriors feel a cold fear creeping into their hearts. But you would not let us keep it, she said. And now there was an edge to her voice, a hardness that had not been there before. You killed our farmers and our teachers and our children, and you expected us to simply accept it because we had chosen to be kind. You confused our mercy for inability. You mistook our restraint for cowardice. You thought that because we would not fight, we could not fight. She leaned forward, and her eyes seemed to look directly into the soul of every being watching across the galaxy. You were wrong. We are not peaceful because we do not know violence. We are peaceful because we know it better than any species in this galaxy. We have spent our entire existence perfecting the art of killing each other, developing weapons that your scientists cannot even imagine. strategies that would make your greatest generals weep with terror. We chose peace not because it was easy, but because we knew what we would become if we did not. And now you have forced us to remember. The broadcast shifted again, showing technical readouts and schematics that made the military analysts watching in XRE command centers feel their blood run cold. Weapons they had never seen. Technologies that should not have been possible. Ships that made their proudest dreadnoughts look like children's toys. "This is Earth's final warning," Vasquez declared. And her voice rang out across the stars like a bell tolling for the dead. "Cease all hostilities against human civilians and military personnel within 72 hours. Withdraw your forces from all territories you have taken from us. Surrender those responsible for the attacks on our colonies to face justice for their crimes. If you do not comply with these demands, we will stop pretending to be polite." She paused one last time, and when she spoke again, her voice was quiet and sad and utterly terrifying. "You have seen what we do to our enemies," she said. "You have watched us burn our own cities and poison our own world in our fury, and we did that to people we loved. To our brothers and sisters and parents and children. Imagine what we will do to you. You will not receive another warning." The broadcast ended, and for a long moment, the galaxy was silent in the throne room of the XRE Empire. High Commander Vexarak watched the recording for the third time, his compound eyes scanning every frame for signs of deception. His advisors clustered around him, their chittering voices filling the chamber with conflicting opinions. "It is a bluff," General Crickstill insisted. The same general who had ordered the first attacks on human colonies. "They have no fleet, no army, nothing but words and empty threats." The technical specifications they showed, another advisor began. "Fabrications," Crickstill interrupted, "designed to frighten us into abandoning our conquest. But we are XRE, and we do not bow to the bleating of prey animals." High Commander Vexarak said nothing, his gaze fixed on the frozen image of Ambassador Vasquez's face, on the look in her eyes that reminded him of something he had seen only once before. He had been young then, barely more than a hatchling, when he had watched his father corner a small creature in the hunting grounds of their estate. The creature had been wounded, bleeding, clearly no threat to a warrior of the Vexari, and his father had approached it with the casual confidence of a predator claiming its kill. But the creature had not run, had turned, and in its eyes, young Vexarak had seen something that haunted his dreams for years. Afterward, it was the look of a being that had nothing left to lose, nothing left to fear, a being that had already accepted its own death, and was now simply deciding how many of its enemies it would take with it. His father had killed the creature, of course, but not before it had torn out his eye and left scars that he carried for the rest of his life. Ambassador Vasquez had that same look. "Double the assault force," High Commander Vexarak ordered finally, "and launch the attack immediately before their deadline expires." "A wise decision," Crickstill said with satisfaction. "We will crush their largest colony and show the galaxy that the Vexari do not negotiate with the weak." Vexarak did not respond, but as his generals filed out of the chamber to prepare for war, he found himself wondering if he had just made the greatest mistake of his life. Far away, in the darkness between stars, ancient systems hummed to life for the first time in centuries. Ships that had been sleeping in the void began to wake, their crews emerging from stasis pods with eyes that held the cold clarity of soldiers who had been waiting for this moment and on Earth. Admiral Yuki Tanaka watched the Vexari fleet begin its advance and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not fear, not anger, not even satisfaction, just a deep and terrible sadness for what was about to happen. They should have listened. She said to no one in particular. Then she gave the order that would change the galaxy forever. The Vexari Third Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel above, New Shanghai at exactly 73 hours after humanity's warning. 1 hour past the deadline that the soft little humans had given them. 400 warships arranged themselves in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready. Their crews eager to add another victory to the glory of the Empire. Admiral Crystal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, watching the blue-green world below with the hungry anticipation of a predator. About to feast. New Shanghai was humanity's largest remaining colony, home to nearly 50 million humans who had built a thriving civilization on this distant world. By tomorrow, it would be nothing but ash. Scan for defensive installations, Crystal ordered, though he already knew what his sensors would find. Nothing. Admiral, his tactical officer reported. No orbital platforms, no weapon satellites, no military vessels of any weight. The officer's voice trailed off, his antennae twitching with confusion. What is it? Crystal demanded. There's a single ship approaching from the dark side of the planet, the officer said slowly, as if he could not quite believe what he was seeing. It is not responding to our hails, and its design matches nothing in our databases. Crystal turned to the main view screen and felt the first cold whisper of doubt crawl up his spine. The ship was beautiful in a terrible way. Its hull black as the void between galaxies, its lines angular and predatory in a manner that suggested it had been designed with only one purpose in mind. Strange symbols covered its surface, characters from languages that the Dexari translation systems could not identify, because they predated spaceflight by thousands of years. Ancient human scripts, Crystal would later learn. Sanskrit and Latin and Norse runes and binary code, all woven together in patterns that formed words of power and warning. The ship's name was painted on its prow in letters of burning gold. Pandora's regret. One ship, Crystal said, and the doubt in his voice transformed into contempt. They send one ship against 400, and they think this will save them? He turned to his weapons officer with mandibles spread wide in the Dexari expression of cruel amusement. Destroy it. The Eternal Conquest opened fire with enough firepower to crack a small moon. And for a moment, the void between the fleets was filled with blazing light. The light faded, and Pandora's regret hung motionless in space, completely untouched. Impossible, the weapons officer whispered. Direct hits, all of them. But their shields, I have never seen readings like this. All ships, concentrate fire on that vessel, Crystal ordered, his voice sharp with sudden uncertainty. 400 warships unleashed everything they had. Plasma cannons and missile barrages and energy. Weapons that could cut through anything the galaxy had ever produced. The combined assault would have reduced a planet to rubble. Pandora's regret simply waited until the barrage ended, then began to move. What happened next would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for generations, analyzed and debated and ultimately accepted as proof that humanity had been hiding capabilities beyond anything the other species had imagined. The human ship did not fly so much as dance, moving through space with a grace that defied physics, appearing in multiple locations simultaneously as if it existed in several dimensions at once. When it struck with weapons that the Dexari could not understand. The first volley was kinetic. Simple slugs of dense matter accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, and where they hit, ships simply ceased to exist, converted instantly into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. The second volley was something worse. Missiles that did not explode, but instead released fields of distorted gravity that crushed everything within range into spheres no larger than a clenched fist. Third volley was worst of all. Beams of something that was not light and not energy, but something else entirely. Something that simply erased matter from existence. As if it had never been. Admiral Crystal watched his fleet die around him and felt an emotion that no Dexari had felt in 10,000 years of conquest, he felt fear. All ships, retreat. He screamed into the fleet-wide channel. Fall back, fall back. This is... The transmission cut off as Pandora's regret appeared directly in front of the Eternal Conquest. Close enough that Krikstal could see the symbols etched into its hull through the bridge viewports. For one long moment, the two ships faced each other, and Krikstal found himself staring at his own reflection in the black mirror of the human vessel's surface. Then a voice came through on every frequency, calm and quiet and infinitely sad. You should have listened. The Eternal Conquest died in a flash of light that was visible from the surface of New Shanghai. The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted 11 minutes from first shot to last. When it was over, 400 XRE warships had been reduced to debris and dust, and Pandora's regret hung alone in the void without a single scratch on its hull. But humanity was not finished across the galaxy. In places that no one had thought to look, the darkness came alive. Ships emerged from asteroids that had been hollowed out centuries ago, rising from tombs of stone and ice, like ancient warriors waking from an endless sleep. Ships rose from the crushing depths of gas giants, where no sensor could penetrate. Their hulls, gleaming with technologies that should not have survived such pressure. Ships appeared in the empty spaces between stars, where nothing should have been able to hide, materializing out of the void as if they had been there all along, just waiting for the call. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, an armada beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Each ship marked with those same ancient symbols, each one carrying weapons that could burn worlds. The Galactic Concord sensor network went mad with alerts as humanity's hidden fleet revealed itself. And in council chambers across known space, the elder races looked upon what had been sleeping in their midst and understood at last how badly they had misjudged the young species. The Bafil, Vethkai delegate, the one who had mocked humanity's lack of warships, watched the sensor feeds with crystalline eyes that flickered between colors no human could perceive. They were never defenseless, he said quietly. They simply chose not to show us their strength, and we mistook their kindness for weakness. On the Vex-Ari homeworld, High Commander Vexarak received word of the Third Fleet's destruction and felt his world collapse around him. His generals had assured him that victory would be easy, that humans were prey animals who could not fight back, that their warning was nothing but empty posturing. Now 400 ships were gone, their crews scattered across the void as frozen corpses and cooling debris. And the humans had not even tried one ship. They had done this with one ship. What do we do? One of his advisors asked, his voice trembling with the fear that was spreading through the Empire like a plague. Of X. Arak looked at the holographic display showing the human fleet, at the cold lights of 10,000 warships that had been waiting in the darkness for 200 years. He thought of the look in Ambassador Vasquez's eyes, the look of a being who had already accepted the cost of what she was about to do. He thought of his father's scars, of the wounded creature that had fought back when it had nothing left to lose, and he understood, far too late, that humanity had not been hiding their strength out of weakness. They have been hiding it out of mercy. Contact the humans, he said finally, his voice hollow with defeat. Tell them we surrender unconditionally. High Commander, General Krikstal's successor protested. We cannot simply. The alternative, Vexarak interrupted, is extinction. And not just for our fleet or our army, but for our entire species. He turned to face his advisors, and they saw something in his eyes that silenced all objection. We poked the sleeping beast, he said, and now it has woken, and our only hope of survival is to pray that it remembers how to be merciful. The surrender was transmitted 6 hours after the Battle of New Shanghai. The war was over before it had truly begun, but as the galaxy would soon learn, the war had never been the point. The point was what came after. The Galactic Concord assembled 3 days after the Vex-Ari surrender. And for the first time in 50,000 years, every seat in the great chamber was filled. Delegates from species that had not attended a council session in millennia made the journey to witness what would happen next. Their ancient ships emerging from distant corners of the galaxy to see with their own eyes. The young species that had shattered the natural order. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked into that chamber alone, her footsteps echoing in a silence so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. The delegates watched her with eyes and sensors and organs of perception that humans could not name. And in those watching gazes, she saw something that had never been directed at humanity before: fear. Not the casual contempt of the strong looking upon the weak. Not the patronizing concern of elders watching children play, but genuine, primal fear of something that could destroy them all. She reached the speaker's platform and stood there for a long moment, looking out at the assembled representatives of 1,000 civilizations. Then she spoke. 19 months ago, I stood in this chamber and begged you for help. I showed you evidence of atrocities committed against our people, and I asked you to stand with us against injustice. You refused. You told us that the galaxy was harsh, that the strong preyed upon the weak, and that we should accept our fate with dignity. You were wrong. She paused, and in that pause, the fear in the chamber deepened into something approaching terror. We did not come to the stars seeking conquest, she continued. We came seeking friends, hoping to find species who shared our dreams of peace and cooperation, who could help us build a future worthy of our children. Instead, we found a galaxy that rewards cruelty and punishes kindness, that sees mercy as weakness and compassion as foolishness. We tried to change that, to show you a different way, and you laughed at us. The Vexari murdered our people, and you did nothing. They burned our colonies, and you watched. They killed our children, and you told us that this was simply the natural order of things. Her voice cracked slightly, and those close enough to see her face noticed that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. So now you have seen what we are, she said, what we have always been. Beneath the smiles and the diplomatic protocols and the offers of friendship, we are humanity. We are the species that nearly destroyed itself a dozen times before we ever reached the stars, that developed weapons of mass destruction before we developed reliable agriculture, that turned our own world into a battlefield and painted its surface with the blood of billions. We chose peace because we knew what we would become if we did not, because we looked at our own history and decided that we could not survive another war. But we never forgot how to fight. And now you know that too. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had dismissed humanity as irrelevant, who had stood by while the Vexari slaughtered innocent civilians, who had done nothing while children died screaming. The Vexari Empire has surrendered, she announced. Their military has been dismantled. Their leadership will face trial for crimes against humanity, and their territory will be administered by a coalition of neutral parties until a new government can be established. This is not negotiable. What is negotiable is what happens next. She pressed a control on her podium, and the chamber's holographic display activated, showing a document that had been prepared by the United Earth Council. We are proposing a new charter for the Galactic Concord, she explained. One that establishes clear rules for the treatment of civilians during conflicts, that creates mechanisms for intervening when species are being victimized, that recognizes basic rights that apply to all sentient beings, regardless of their technological level or military strength. We are also proposing a mutual defense treaty that would unite willing species against any who would seek to conquer through terror and mass murder. These proposals are not demands. You are free to reject them, to continue as you have always done, to let the strong prey upon the weak while you watch from the safety of your council chambers. But know this, she leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast hall. We will not go back to sleep. Our fleet will remain active. Our weapons will remain ready, and we will be watching. If another species faces what we faced, if another people are murdered while the galaxy stands by and does nothing, we will act. Not because we want to, not because we enjoy the violence that lives in our blood, but because someone has to. We tried to be peaceful. We tried to show you a better way. You would not let us. So now we will keep the peace ourselves. And we will do it by whatever means are necessary. She straightened, and when she spoke again, her voice was heavy with a grief that would never fully heal. We did not want this, she said. We came to the stars hoping to leave our demons behind, hoping that the galaxy would help us become better than we were. Instead, you forced us to remember who we are. So now you know. We are humanity. We are sorry. And we are asking. We are begging you to never make us show you this again. The chamber was silent as she finished speaking. Silent as she gathered her materials and stepped down from the platform. Silent as she walked toward the exit without looking back then, slowly, one by one. The delegates began to signal their agreement. The HFY were first, their crystalline spokesman rising to formally endorse humanity's proposals. Then the Cathari, then the Velocians, then species whose names humans could barely pronounce. Each one adding their voice to a growing chorus of support by the time Ambassador Vasquez reached the chamber doors. Every species present had voted in favor. She paused at the threshold, one hand resting on the ancient frame, and allowed herself a moment to absorb what had just happened. Humanity had won. They had forced the galaxy to change. To acknowledge that peace was not weakness, and that mercy was not cowardice, but the victory tasted like ashes in her mouth, because she knew what it had cost, knew what humanity had been forced to become, knew that the children who had died on New Helsinki and Proxima Verde and a dozen other worlds had paid the price for a lesson the galaxy should have learned without bloodshed behind her. The delegates were already discussing implementation details, arguing over specifics, beginning the long work of building a better future ahead of her. The corridor stretched empty and quiet, leading back to a world that would never be quite the same. Lena Vasquez, ambassador of Earth, hero of humanity, walked into that corridor and let the tears finally fall in the darkness between stars. 10,000 human warships maintained their vigil, crewed by men and women who had hoped they would never be needed. They did not celebrate the victory. They did not boast of their power. They simply watched and waited, as their ancestors had watched and waited for 200 years, hoping that the galaxy would learn and that they would never have to fight again. The wolves were awake now, and they could not go back to sleep, but they could dream. They could dream of a future where no species had to choose between extinction and becoming monsters, where the strong protected the weak instead of preying upon them, where children could grow up without learning the taste of fear. It was a dream worth fighting for, was a dream worth dying for, and humanity, for all its flaws, had never stopped believing that dreams could become reality. The galaxy had wanted to know what humans were truly capable of. Now they knew, and perhaps, just perhaps, that knowledge would be enough to build something better from the ashes of what had come before. Time would tell, but for now, the wolves kept their watch, and the galaxy slept peacefully for the first time in 50,000 years. Not because there was no danger, but because humanity had promised to face the darkness so that others did not have to. It was, in the end, the most human thing they could have done. And somewhere among the stars, the spirits of 12,000 souls who had died on New Helsinki looked down upon their people and smiled. Their deaths had not been in vain. The future they had dreamed of was finally beginning, and humanity, battered and scarred and forever changed, would be there to see it through. This was not an ending. This was a beginning, and the universe would never be the same.